So, hello again, everyone. Welcome to our January 2024 edition of the Idaho Department of Labor's Labor Market Insight series. And Happy New Year. My name is Lindsay Trombley, and I'm the Public Information Specialist at the Idaho Department of Labor, and I'm also your host today. So today we're going to have Research Analyst Supervisor Craig Shaul explore current labor market data in a presentation that he just had. Afterwards, Labor Economist for Southwestern Idaho Jan Roeser will be sharing data related to housing and educational attainment from the American Community Survey. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it off to Craig to get us started.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. This is a nice day of winter out there, so hopefully everyone's enjoying the winter driving and taking it safe out there. And welcome to our first webinar for the labor market series for this year. We thought we would kind of just give kind of repetition of the presentation I make to the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee each year. Basically it provides kind of a context for what the Idaho Department of Labor, how it reads the current situation, given what's the most recent data, and then kind of what we expect for the future. And this is part of every year the legislature starts with this committee, the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee, and then I'll give a URL to Lindsay that you can go and kind of see what this year's event was about, and you can actually go and see my presentation. And there's a lot of other presentations there that are very useful, and I would actually recommend you do that. It kind of provides a nice whole picture of Idaho. And I'll reference a couple in my presentation here. So it's a little bit different. I have a couple different things. Also, we have, as Lindsay mentioned, Jan's going to be talking about some recent census data and some things she's looked at. So I'm just going to give this about 30 minutes, and then looking for this to be somewhat informal, even though we have this barrier between us and I can't really see you. But if you have a question or something as we're going, please feel free to ask it. Otherwise, we'll make sure we have a few minutes at the end of mine, after about 25 minutes to address any questions you have and turn it over to Jan. With that, we'll get started. I'll share my screen and hopefully this goes all right. All right. All right, is this showing up? All right, cool. All right, so one other thing, gotta get my notes. Useful PowerPoint. All right. So Idaho's economic, there we go. I like to start off all my presentations with the unemployment rate. It's kind of the flagship statistic, even though it doesn't necessarily paint the full picture of what's going on in Idaho's economy, but it's the one everyone relates to. And in this graph we have what our unemployment rate's done throughout its history that we have on record right now, 1976 to 2024. Our most recent release was 3.3% for November 2023. And that's actually come up a little bit from the middle of the year, from about 2.8%, mid to high 2.8 or 2%. And that's certainly an increase of what we've seen this year. It seems like it might be that unemployment is going up a little bit, but as you can see, our unemployment rate is still in very low territory. Our 2017 to 2023 average, the last few years, it's about 3.4%. So we're ending the year of 2023 right at about what the average would be for the last few years, and that's even including the pandemic, that little spike, now outlier year of 2020. But also note that I like this graph a lot. It really kind of shows how the difference in our economy has been, at least as far as unemployment rate goes, has been for the last few years compared to what Idaho's average has been through these last few decades that we have on record. So 5.7% is the average for that. And so these last few years, it's really kind of, if we haven't been in a worker shortage altogether like we've been the last couple of years, that's actually kind of easing up with the 3.3%. It's been a tight labor market, and that's kind of, we'll get to some of that later, but it's really kind of a function of demographics on that one. Some of the things that are, on the macro side of the economy that includes beyond just Idaho, some of the things that are driving those numbers up in terms of the unemployment rate is that Idaho is still enjoying a labor force number increase. So that labor force number is growing. Employment absorption seems to be slowing slightly. So, but as we get into some of the jobs, Idaho's jobs and labor market is still quite strong, even at 3.3%. And the next graph will kind of show that that 3.3% going up. It's not necessarily that unemployment's increasing. That's some sort of concern. It's that unemployment's increasing, and there's actually a little bit of relief in terms of the job, the worker shortage, the job labor force tightness that employers have been feeling. We're comparing the open jobs using Help Wanted Online statistics from the Conference Board. For Idaho, it's about 40,000. It ends up in November 2023 again. The number of unemployed is 32,000. Sorry, wrong one. 32,000. And so when you compare the number of open jobs to the number of unemployed people looking for work, it's about 1.2 open positions for every unemployed. So that's down from 1.7 that we were at last year at this time when I did this presentation. And then we're actually about, so 5,000, last year there was about 5,700 fewer unemployed, so for that 1.7, and we have about 18,000 more job openings than we had at this point in 2023. So you can kind of see that there's just fewer job openings, a few more unemployed. That might be that some employers aren't hiring as much, but as we see as we get to our jobs numbers, Idaho's jobs have been growing pretty well. So it seems like this is kind of a good sign for employers and for the economy that there's available workers for employers. Although I will say that that might be a fallacy of composition a little bit, because even last week I was talking to employers, and the common refrain that I was hearing was that I'm losing employees to competitors, and so even though we're seeing that things look a little bit less pressurized for employers, it's still a tight labor market. It's still that unemployment rate of 3.3% still means that employers are looking to get workers from other employers, really, to attract those others to fill their open positions. So, all right, next slide. So one of the things we do for the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee is some analysts from the Department of Labor kind of get together, and we develop what we expect to see in the next couple of state fiscal years that runs offset by 6 months from the calendar year. So the state fiscal year ends in June and begins in July. So we provide basically our kind of 18-month outlook for what we think the unemployment rate is going to do. And every year we kind of have the same slides. And it actually kind of ends up being the same repetitive thing I've done since about 2017, which is we expect that the unemployment rates we're experiencing, which has been under 3% or around 3% consistently, we just don't expect those ever to continue, but each year they do. And so right now we're at 3.3%. We expect the Idaho's unemployment rate to continue to kind of ratchet up as we get towards the end of the state fiscal year of 2024. And so we'll end up at an average of 3.2% for Idaho. And then going forward, 3.8%. And part of that's being driven by, there's some expectation that the economy might slow down in the first part of 2024, basically because of some of the soft landing or the Conference Board, which I have their forecast for the U.S. unemployment rate here, which is 3.9 and 4.2, which is very close to what the Federal Open Market Committee has for theirs as well. And in their models, they have a light recession the first and second quarter of 2024. And this was their November read, by the way, so maybe it's changed since the December meeting for the Federal Open Market Committee. But 3.9%, 4.2%. So even if we're expecting some sort of softness and where the unemployment rate might go up, by no means is that going to be, that's still been very low unemployment, and it's still below. Robert Spenlove had a nice graph in his presentation for the ERAC, where it kind of had this 4.5% to 5% band that show where it gets into that or above, we're kind of getting into a recession period. But even if we, this is kind of those things where what does a recession mean going forward with how the economy is working? Like we expect a recession, but employment is going to stay low. Should that bear out? So that's where we expect the economy to go. So we kind of not so many words, and we're expecting it to be a continuation in terms of the labor market. We expect it to there might be some weakness in terms of employment absorption, but not to any degree that we're going to see an employment rate shoot up. So we expect Idaho's labor market to remain strong for the next couple of years. All right. Next slide. So one of the things driving Idaho's economy and the nation's economy right now is the demographics and the participation into the labor market. And so here we have the labor force participation rate. And my next slide will explain what all this means. But Idaho's participation rate in this last year has fallen to 62.5 for November 2023. We're kind of counter-cyclical this year compared to what the U.S. average is doing, which is kind of atypical for what Idaho has done through its economic history for this read from 1976. But I will say that each year Idaho and all the states, they benchmark their labor force and job numbers. When I presented this last year, it was 62.5%. And then we did our benchmark, which, by the way, it starts next month in February. It was benchmarked up to 62.8 and it came back down. So it might be that, we go up a little bit, kind of don't really know with the benchmark what will happen. But even so, the signal, what are the estimates the forecast is providing is there's a downward signal for Idaho's participation. And now what makes up what does that mean? So this is basically a quick little labor market information training. Which the way we calculate that is, and what we're looking at is, we start with the civilian population. Right now, for Idaho, that's about 1.5 million for the 2023 average. And what that includes is it's a specific slice of the population that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, which is anyone that's 16 years of age or older. It doesn't matter if you're just in 16 years and older up until you're dead. There's no limit on that upper age. And that's important as we get into the other slices here. In addition, the civilian population, they're not in the military and they're not institutionalized. So the idea is that if you're 16 years and older and be able to potentially work, you're considered part of the civilian population. In addition, we have the labor force, and the labor force for Idaho right now is 964,400 for the average. And what that includes is if you're employed, or if you're unemployed but looking for work, and you look for work for the last 4 weeks and you're available to work now. So those are kind of the constraints or the conditions that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has to be included in the labor force. So the labor force, when you fit it over the civilian population, and the difference, you take that percent of the civilian population that's in the labor force, that's like either employed or looking for work if you're not. That is the participation rate. So that 62.5% I referenced earlier is the percent that's in the labor force versus in the civilian population. In addition, we have employed. So right now there's the average is 937,100. And that is, if you get that over the labor force, that little ring of red is the unemployment rate. So the percent of the employed or the percent that's not employed in the labor force is the unemployed. And if you, for the rate here, it's about 2.7% for 2.8% for Idaho's average for 2023 so far. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what the parts of the onion are in terms of when we look at labor force. And then the other question, I did get a question at the committee, which was who are not working then? The 62.5% that are in the labor force, who's the 37.5 that are not. And so here we have the 61.9%. This is actually the US, so we're kind of using a different population, but the averages should kind of be similar to what we're seeing in Idaho. The US, so that for this time rate, it's 2021, 61.9% in the labor force. So a large majority that aren't are retired, and that's kind of what we expect with retirees. In addition, we have people who are disabled, they're in school, caring for family, and then other reasons they may not be in the labor force. All right, so here we're shifting out again. So Idaho's participation rate, even though it's low, and I would actually recommend Matt Hurd's presentation. It was on a couple time slots before mine. He really got into the migration of Idaho and kind of talked about the demographics, which I think is very important, and important to realize is that Idaho's most recent population growth, we're fourth in the nation, 1.3%. That's a little bit lower than what we were last year, which is 1.8 when we were second. And then was it 1.8, Jan? I think it was 1.8. 1.8. And then before that, I mean, 2020, 2021, 2022, we were at 2.93, 3.5. So I mean, we were close to 3%. And so that the top three states that are ahead of us, South Carolina, Florida, Texas. Last year, Florida was number one, 1.9%. That whole change is kind of slowing down a little bit. So where we had we were in the twos, threes, that migration seems to be slowing down in terms of percent. And also it seems to be the focus of US migration, instead of coming from center or east to west, seems to be going from west, specifically California, and some parts of Oregon, and focusing on the south and southeast. So Jan, do you have any? I know you kind of did. You just kind of crunched these numbers pretty well. Do you have anything to add on this one in terms of like what this data shows?
Well, I would say that last year we had a lot more of the share of growth that was attributed to domestic in-migration, so from other states, like you were alluding to. And this year it upticked a little bit for international in-migration, which can include active military coming back to, for example, the Mountain Home Air Force Base, but it can also include our refugee program and various families that have solicited and had family members come back. So there's that. Our natural change also upticked a little bit, and that happened across the nation. We didn't have the pandemic with the inordinate deaths that were occurring, because natural change is first minus deaths. So yeah, a little bit of a change of share of the growth, but other than that, yeah, we are slowing down to a pace that is probably more easy to plan for. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I would second that. The pace we have now is more of a moderate type of increase. So 1.3 is still very good. I mean, most models, I think in the webinar I did at the end of last year, 1.2 is kind of the optimistic one we picked in 2012. So 1.3 is still kind of right there. I would also add that with Matt Hurd's presentation on migration to Idaho, that even though we talk about retirees, and I just kind of transitioned this from a participation rate that talked about the majority not participating are retirees. A large portion that are moving in are working age cohort. So the 24 to 54-year-olds that are moving to Idaho, most of those are, we're getting a large portion that are working in Idaho. So even though our 65 plus is growing, and it's the fastest growing part of our population in terms of demographics, a lot of that is people that are here. And we are getting about a third. I think some of the reads on the land migration statistics, even though they're you got to take those with a grain of salt a little bit. About a third of the people moving here might be moving here to retire. And actually, as I go into the next slide, those people that are in migrating are really, and even though we see the participation rate maybe staying level or kind of keeping in this lower range that we've been dealing with for the last few years, Idaho's non-farm jobs in terms of year-to-year growth is leading is one or two in the nation last couple of weeks, or sorry, last couple of months. So 3.1 for November, year-to-year growth from the previous November is, I think, second in the nation. 3.3 was first. And so, and what those rankings mean is that even though we have, the in-migration slowing down, we have kind of a uptick in unemployment rate. Our jobs are still growing by a fairly strong degree. In fact, we're over almost a factor of 2, not quite a factor of 2 of the nation's year-to-year growth, but it's still pretty strong for Idaho. Now, if you look at that from a pre-pandemic peak standpoint, looking at February 2020 growth, the growth since February 2020, Idaho's has the highest percentage change of job growth in terms of non-farm jobs since 11.5%. Utah is second, and that's from 2020. All right. And then how the 3.1% we referenced earlier for the November year-to-year. Now these numbers, these are estimates, so the year-to-year change, and even as we see that these numbers are change each month a little bit. But right now, it looks like construction, education, and health services, and information are kind of the top growth industries for Idaho in terms of percentage change in jobs. And then on the education and health, 7,800 of the jobs, so a larger proportion of that change is in healthcare and social services, and about 2,200, and I'll get the number in the next slide. 2,200 is in the education side of that sector. So, and then, so the 3.1% in total non-farm change represents about 26,100 additional jobs over the 12-month period. Then we look at the numbers, the education health, that's 10,000. So 7,800 of that is on the education health side. And then professional business services and construction are pretty strong. Manufacturing's decline that we see on the previous slide and this one, we don't attribute that to any kind of weakness we might be seeing in that industry. It seems to be more of some churn and maybe difficulty in hiring, but also maybe might be some nuance in the numbers and how the seasonality of the numbers are hitting in terms of what we're seeing for November versus what we normally see. So looking at the future for the industries, the Idaho Department of Labor, we do a 2-year projection as part of the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee process. And for the 2023, so the growth from 2023 first quarter to 2023, 2025, so we're kind of right in the middle of this already. We expect, our model expects 4,500 increase in healthcare and social assistance, 26 in construction and manufacturing. Those three are we project to be our largest growing in terms of jobs. I would say that the 4,500 for healthcare and social assistance is actually pretty conservative, and we tend to be kind of conservative on our projections anyway. But the year-to-year growth on the previous slide is about 7,800. So that's over 1 year. So we're more likely to see that growth in healthcare and social systems by, if not more likely an underestimate than anything else. But we expect to see that to be continue to be the fastest growing industry in Idaho, or at least in terms of numbers, the largest growing. Sorry, way. All right, so looking at the covered wages. So each year we also provide basically what we anticipate the covered wages to do in Idaho. And when we say covered, we're just talking about those that labor, those jobs in Idaho that are under that pay unemployment insurance taxes. And so we collect that information on. Annualized total covered wages and salaries from 2022 third quarter to 2023 third quarter. It's increased by 3.98 billion to 46.5, which is an increase of 9.4%. And as a comparison, last year it was a 4.99 billion and 13.3% increase for 2021, 2022 three quarters. In the most recent 2 years, Idaho's total covered wages has increased 9.3 million more than during the 6 years from third quarter 2015 to 2020 third quarter. This is a result of both increases in the wages themselves and total employment. So people are getting paid more, but also Idaho's labor market's expanding. Department analysts expect by the second quarter of 2025 that the annualized total of Idaho's covered wages and salaries will reach 52.8 million, which is an increase of 6.3 billion from the end of fiscal year 2023, and a 13.5% increase. This increase, like I've been mentioning, that's a conservative expectation that we continue to expect Idaho's population labor force to expand, but at the more moderate rates that we kind of seeing with they're being borne out by the census with the 1.3. We expect that to be the continuation. All right. So as you can imagine, go ahead.
It's 11:27, so I wanted to see if you wanted to keep going or if you wanted to transition to Jan.
Well, I would put in a plug for these two real quick, unless we have any questions. This is actually kind of, these next two slides are just kind of a repeat of what we did in a webinar last year, our business climate survey. So rather than me kind of going through these for you again, I would include a link to that webinar that we did and also reference the report we did for this concern. But really, it's just kind of highlighting how labor and turnover are kind of the two highest concerns that businesses reported back as part of the survey that we did last year. And then I would just say we're going to do this survey again this year, and it'll be interesting to see how these numbers change, or if there's a change in order. I'm going to guess it's going to be consistent, but I think that's the summation of everything I've got. So unless there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to pass this over to Jan.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I did kind of want to ask and touch on, because I'm sure, maybe some of the people who are in this webinar are curious. Do you have an answer as to why the healthcare industry is expected to grow so much?
Sure. I think, well, actually, when you say so much, it is our largest industry in terms of single employment. So it's growing by 4,500 is kind of representation of how big it is in Idaho's economy. But also Idaho's population is using, I mean, it's consuming healthcare services more and more. There's more people, and it's also as people are getting older, there's more of a consumption of these services. So it's kind of a number of things going on, but I would also say that this sector also has its challenges, even though it's growing by a very large degree. There's some nuances that I think the stakeholders probably want to be aware of, and I would recommend Brian Whitworth's presentation as part of the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee. So if you can find that, and I know that it also puts those up, so I would say that would be a good kind of explanation of that industry's, the hospital association's kind of outlook on things right now.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi there. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Oh,
you are good to go.
All righty. I won't give a big introduction about the American Community Survey. It is definitely something that is released every year, but there's two parts to it. And I'll just briefly say there's a 1 year that was released earlier this year that has to do with the larger geographies. And I look forward personally to this 5-year release because it includes pretty much all of our 44 counties here in Idaho. There are a few holes in the data when you get to the comparative profiles, because you may not get the comparison for 2013 through 2017, which is what we use for the 5-year. We don't want to have any overlapping years. They use all the data between those 5-year periods. And so when we compare, that's what we look at. I don't have these wonderful data series that Craig presented because the American Community Survey, frankly, started around 2009, 2010. So let's jump right into it. I'm mainly talking about educational attainment and housing, two very important things for Idaho, especially if we look into our relatively near past. There was a time when we thought we need to capture our students. They're going out of state to school. We need to make sure that there's not a brain drain. I think with the very competitive pricing that our universities have and the quality of education, I think we are capturing a lot of our students. Plus, we're bringing in students from other states and international countries that do attend our universities. So the educational attainment has really changed and shifted over the years, as has our housing, which everybody knows about. So let's jump right into educational attainment. This is our land grant, such a pretty picture in our snowy day today in Boise, but this is Moscow University of Idaho, our land grant institution. This is the educational attainment for the state of Idaho. And I didn't include little arrows that show the change from the 2013 through 2017 data compared to the 2018 to 2022 data. But these first 4 categories, which are all less than getting any type of degree. So it starts with less than 9th grade, goes to 9th grade to 12th grade with no diploma. Then we have high school graduates, and that includes your GED equivalency. And then we have some college, no degree. So all of these are without an actual degree post-secondary. And these are all declining. So we're moving from 2017 to 2022, and you can see if we had little arrows, these would all be declining. And what that tells me is that some of our elderly that really didn't need degrees, some of the 90-year-olds, the 80-year-olds that are passing, they managed to run businesses. They managed to do a lot of different jobs, of course, not professional degrees, but they did a lot more with less education. And we're seeing some of that older generation fade away. And the new generation that's coming forward has seen our various charts that we put out with Department of Labor that show that education does pay. And we're seeing an increase in our associate's degrees. Of course, we have now 4, because Lewiston doesn't have one, and neither does the Pocatello area. We have 4 community colleges, and you can really see that the associate degrees are higher in those areas where those community colleges are located. You also see bachelor's degrees increase dramatically from that previous 5-year period. And then you see graduate or professional degrees increase as well. Fairly big jump for Idaho, quite frankly. And we're just seeing that some of our industries that are growing, including a lot of our software developers, our manufacturing, it is all requiring more automation. It's requiring more engineering. And we do have the big expansion with Micron coming, and we're going to be bringing in a lot of R&D. So I can't help but imagine that our graduate and professional degrees will continue to grow. We certainly have the largest chunk of these in our counties with the universities.
Hey, Jan.
Yes.
We just had a question in the chat just to clarify. These statistics, are these for the 25 years and up population, or what's
very good. They are for the 25 years and up. It's pretty hard these days to find the 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, even 21 and 22 sometimes that have graduated. And so we're really looking at 25 years and up. Yeah, we're not looking below that. Great question.
Yeah, there's actually another question too. Is vocational certifications, is that in this data as well, or is that not tracked in the American Community Survey?
I would think that, and I don't know that for sure, and I can check that, but I do believe it's under some college, no degree. That's where those would show up. This would also include those individuals that have tried college and maybe haven't finished. We know that there's quite a cohort in Idaho that attempt it when they're young, go back, start working, realize, oh, I really need to finish that degree. And then they may finish it in their early 20s, or I mean, early 30s, late 20s, or even mid 30s or 40s. People go back, they realize, and they have a lot better study skills, they're more mature, it just works out better. So doing the 25 and older just makes sense. Great questions.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, and definitely our certifications are really important. They and it is declining. I know it shows some decline, but part of this is a lot of people get boosted over. These are completions, and so they might have had some college a few years ago, but then they show up in the associate's degrees or the bachelor's degrees. So there's a transition here, almost a pathway. This shows some of the counties that have extraordinary post-secondary outcomes as far as the educational attainment of their current population, that is 25 years and older. Ada County is right up there, of course. We are the center of government here in Ada County. We also have a lot of corporation headquarters. Well, that should have been turned off. Sorry about that, everybody. Blaine County and Teton are interesting, along with Valley, in the fact that they have high educational attainment. We know that the jobs in those three counties don't necessarily require those graduate degrees, but it's just the belief that a lot of the retirees or the early retirees or people that are working remotely have chosen to live in those mountain towns. And so they do have the higher bachelor's degrees and graduate or professional degrees. And then Madison, Latah, those are the ones that make sense. Bonneville as well, because a lot of people that maybe work at Idaho State University and Pocatello might be living in Bonneville County as well, but they also have the INL that requires a lot of PhDs, a lot of engineers, nuclear engineers. So the concentration of our high intelligent workforce can really be found in these, I want to say, 7 counties. Gosh, I'm getting all sorts of calls. All righty, moving right along to housing. And housing is definitely more detailed than the educational attainment. I wanted to jump into Idaho and a few select states as far as occupancy rates. So this is occupancy rates that include all housing units. So rentals and owner-occupied housing. So some of these have mortgages, some of them don't. And you can see that the occupancy rate is increased in almost all of these. There's a couple of exceptions around the state, but these ones that showed up that I found interesting, that I included, showed an increase from 2013 through 2017 to 2018 through 2022. Now, keep in mind, this was the pandemic, and we had a big influx of individuals, really double what our population growth was for this last year during the heat of the pandemic. And so we saw a lot of people coming in and purchasing, but also people living in RVs. So they wouldn't necessarily show up. They would not have an address in our American Community Survey. But what I thought was really fascinating is to look at these tourism-oriented counties, and you can see how low the occupancy rate is. So you can attribute a good portion of this to the fact that they're secondary homes and maybe not occupied all the time, or they're rentals and not occupied all the time. Kootenai County, of course, has a little higher. It's definitely a working county, but it also has the lake, and it has a lot of attraction for tourism as well. Teton County, it's a little bit more remote, so people really live there. But Valley County, we know that Highway 55 is just torn up on Fridays when people are heading up to their their second home up there, and it has some of the lowest occupancy rates. Now, we expect that to change somewhat in Valley County just because of all the construction and building that's going on in Cascade and leading into McCall. Nobody calls me ever except when I'm doing this. Occupied housing, let's see, I can hardly read that. This is the wording of the American Community Survey. I probably would not use the word tenure, but they use the word tenure mix. So they're showing who's occupying those occupied units. So the total amount is over 700,000 for our housing units, but this is the occupied amount. And we can see that 72% is what it's moved into from 69%. You can see the pressure of housing as this changes over. And then you can see that some of the renters are fleeing. Now, this does not include, this does include 2022 when the interest rates started to go up, but it doesn't include the good portion of 2023 that really stalled out. And I don't believe it probably includes, it's heavily weighted by the previous 4 years. They have a higher weight because there's just more of them. So the 2022, when things started to go downhill as far as interest rates, really aren't captured as well in this data. So you can see that our owner occupied cohort did grow definitely throughout Idaho, and the renters went down. Now, this doesn't include a lot of the apartments that are being built in some of our larger cities, but also some of our smaller cities have realized they need more density. They need apartments close to where the actual businesses are. So we're going to see this change a little bit for the next rendition or the next rendition after that of the 5-year American Community Survey. Let's see. This particular slide says all housing with mortgages. So you can see it better than I can. I somehow don't have that dropping down. But this is the Idaho housing units with mortgages, and then the ones that are without. And you can see that the shift is towards those without. Now, anecdotally, this seems to support that anecdote that people are moving from California. Let's say they're moving from California. That's what everybody says. And they are paying cash for their homes. So we are seeing an increase of housing units without a mortgage. But I caution that narrative because I also see a lot of early retirees and retirees leaving the workforce. And I truly don't believe that most of them are leaving with a mortgage, or if they do, they have one of the 2.5% mortgages that they believe they can get. They can capture that difference in a CD at 5%. And why pay off your mortgage right now? The time will come when they will want to do that. But I think it's probably a combination of those. We certainly do have people coming and paying cash. Our realtors have expressed that, but that's not everybody. And we know that there are individuals coming that are working, and they will want to have mortgages because they're younger in their tenure of owning a home. So this is interesting. I don't know that we can attribute it to just one thing. The next slide is the year that the householder moved in. And I think this is pretty fascinating because it absolutely captures when we had quite a nice priced market in 2010 to 2017. We saw it blow up in these later years, and these are the individuals. You can see that the share of homes that the householder moved in these later years continues to decrease from that point. Homes did start to creep up in price, but nothing like in 2020, 2021, and even 2022, they kept going up. you can see that very, very small segment of our population in Idaho have lived in their home for 30 years. Only, it looks like less than 10%. Well, let's say 40 years in that particular case. That's 1990 and earlier, 30 years. And then this one is 10% is about 20 to 30. So it's a small percentage of people that haven't moved up in their housing. And part of that has to do with the fact that we just really had a lot of building going on, and people saw the opportunity to either maybe move to a smaller home that's nicer, or the opportunity to move into new housing, bigger housing. A lot of subdivisions had been created in this time frame in the millennium. This particular slide, I wasn't able to print this off, so give me just a minute. This is the values of occupied units. So we're getting down to a very smaller portion of all the housing units. So these are the ones that are occupied, and their values. They don't necessarily have a mortgage, but they're owner occupied. I believe that's what it says behind the heading. I really should figure out how to move that so I can see the heading better. But you can see that the median valuation in this particular year, 2018 to 2022 for Idaho, was right around 311,000. You can see that it makes sense. This is the largest column. However, it was only 211,000 in this period of 2013 to 2017. So we saw quite an increase over that time period. And certainly you can see that our homes that are $1 million have more than doubled. And same goes with the $500,000 to $1 million. It's basically tripled. So we've really had an expansion of higher priced, and not so much with the lower. You know, it's growing, but it's pretty hard to find something less than 50,000. I'm not really sure what that looks like. I have an idea, and I don't think any of us want to live there, unfortunately. These are the housing units that, let me see. It's showing, what this particular slide is showing is your cost as a percent of your income. And this particular acronym I could find for you. It has to do with all the various costs that are associated with your mortgage or your rent. But they've excluded anything that's occupied, that they can't define those costs. So this is a smaller cohort that they're using, a smaller universe. And you can see that some of the costs have gone down, and I think we can attribute that to the lower interest rate. It has moved down. Less than 20% is considered a pretty good mortgage at this point. The 30% and above is not, and we're seeing less of those. And once again, when we see this next 5-year, I believe we'll see a big change in that based on the new individuals that have moved in and have had to get a mortgage, unless they did the adjustable rate, which is always so risky. But regardless, I've listened to quite a number of presentations, and the rental of a very nice apartment is literally half of what it would cost to buy a median priced home, at least in the Treasure Valley market. And you're looking at about $3,000 to $4,000 a month as far as your mortgage plus costs associated with your property, versus $2,000 to $2,500 for one of the nicer apartments. So people are choosing the apartments to an extent, and waiting for that interest rate to go down, but not in every case. There are people that are just saying, look, housing costs are just going to continue to go up, and I can't wait to see what happens. I don't have that crystal ball. I think we're getting close to time, 11:51. And so I'm going to wrap up by just saying that the American Community Survey, when it's released, has some really interesting things that make life easy for all of us. And as I've gotten more involved in the census as their state data lead, I've found these treasures, and some of them are ranking tables. Ranking tables are provided only for the 1-year American Community Survey. And you can Google this, you can look, there's a web page devoted to this topic in the census, but it provides 90 topics of ranking of the states. And so if you're in a hurry and you need to see where Idaho ranks on a certain topic, you can go to these ranking tables and it's right there already put together for you. And if you've dealt with census data, you know that when you're pulling up a table from their data.census.gov tool, it doesn't always come in the easiest format to manipulate. So these ranking tables are gold, in my opinion. Unfortunately, they only come in the 1 year. And then the comparison profiles I alluded to at the beginning of my presentation, they are for the 5-year survey, and they compare that previous 5-year period with no overlapping years. The hole in that data is they don't do it for those counties, 5,000 population and under. And we do have about 7 of those counties. The problem with providing that is that they're usually adjusting the dollar amounts. If they're doing median household income, for example, they're adjusting those for inflation. And the sampling is usually really small on those small counties. So they don't go through and they don't do the adjusting. And I have tried to adjust it, and it's not perfect, and they admit it. They use a very odd CPI index. It's a research CPI index, hard to find. Everything about it's hard to find. So the fact that they do leave off a few of the counties, I'm still okay with. The comparison profiles gives you this fabulous ability to look what happened in the previous 5 years, which I use for a lot of my information. And their press kit that comes out on their release always has a national article of interest, and we could always pull up that information for you. Just know that we're here to make life easier for you and pull up information if you need it. This is where you'd go on the census webpage to pull up anything, this particular URL, and then clicking on advanced search. And with that, you filter for the geography, the topic, and even if you know the table number, you're loads ahead. You can just enter that and it pulls up and you can export it into a spreadsheet. So with that, I will stand for questions, as Craig used to say.
Yeah, Jan, I actually have a question. Was there
Go ahead.
anything, and I know this is kind of a broad question, but was there anything that you found particularly surprising about the educational attainment statistics that you saw in the American Community Survey?
I was glad to see that we are expanding in our post-secondary. And quite frankly, the associate's degrees are as valuable. I know the certificates are valuable as well. But as we become more and more automated, more and more service industry oriented, I really do believe that we need all of the education that we can get. I was surprised when I was listening to Craig's presentation, and then I listened to one from the Building Contractors Association, and there will be 4,000 construction workers descending on Micron to build that particular plant. And that's really where the emphasis is right now, is those 4,000 construction workers. But my mind immediately went to, oh my gosh, how are we going to staff that plant? We need educational attainment. And if we do some of the steps along the way and get a certificate and then maybe an associate's degree and then maybe a bachelor's or whatever, but we do need to really push the fact that there needs to be training after high school. High school is not enough.
And this might be too big of a question to ask, but how does that data that you found on educational attainment kind of align with Craig's presentation in relation to industry growth? Are you able to answer that, or is that too large of a question?
Well, I will say that the educational attainment to me aligns with the fact that our median household income grew the fastest in the nation by 15%. And I think that segues with that education pays poster just perfectly. I have no other reason to believe that people are coming in. I mean, certainly we have supply and demand issues, but the education that people have is being recognized by employers, and they're rewarding it appropriately.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, to kind of give some context, we actually do have an education pay poster available on our website. And it features all these educational attainments and kind of the pay scale of which when people enter fields or they have an advanced job, so it kind of shows the pay in comparison. It's really interesting. In our publications page on our website, so you're welcome to check that out. Craig, did you have any questions for Jan?
I would just say we probably want to, following up on that education phase, we'll include a link to that in our follow-up email, I would say. But I would say that I was just looking at the questions here, and probably something Jan should probably clarify is that one of our audience members is asking that there seems to be a discrepancy between the housing burden percent and what you presented and the population stats that they might have been viewing earlier. What would be your response on that?
Could you repeat that, Craig? I didn't totally understand.
So there seems to be the difference in what in terms of the housing burden and the data you just showed. There seems to be a difference between what the population statistics show on that, or and maybe this is something we follow up with the question, but is it, I don't know if you can talk about the differences between what the census release shows and maybe what we've been seeing in other populated census data.
Okay, so they're talking about the population estimates that came out.
Housing burden, housing burden. I guess it seems like this might be
This slide. So it's saying that the housing burden isn't as high, and I think what this is showing is just that this is the people that did not move recently, and they don't have the higher interest rates, and they don't have the higher cost. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that's answering the question at all, but this is through 2022. And I just think people kind of hunkered down during the pandemic. I mean, there was not as active of a housing market during the pandemic. So there's a lot of people with 2.5% interest rates that aren't moving anywhere. They're holding on to that. And so they would be in that under 20% sector here, probably, that grew.
Well, we might follow up on that a little bit.
Okay.
So that was a question for the audience that came from the audience, so I just want to make sure we ask that. So that's every other questions I had. Looks like we're kind of at the top of our hour, so thank you.
We are, yes. And I just want to thank everyone again for attending our webinar. Just to kind of give a plug to our next one. Our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, February 13th. And our Eastern Labor Economist Ryan Whitesides will be exploring the topic of Idaho's rural economy. So we hope to see you there. For more information on our webinars, please visit our calendar of events on our website. We'd like to remind you that the Idaho Department of Labor has many services geared to job seekers, employers, but also includes free access to labor market information available at lmi.idaho.gov.